What if the biggest investing story of the next decade is not a stock, not a sector, not even a country, but the size of the entire economy itself? Because Elon Musk just made a claim that sounds ridiculous at first and very hard to ignore once you think it through. He says the economy could be 10 times bigger within 10 years. And now, on the surface, that sounds insane. Global GDP is not supposed to move like a startup chart. Economies do not normally 10x in a decade. But that is exactly why this matters. Because Elon is not just talking about normal growth, he's talking about what a world where intelligence starts compounding. AI helps humans build better AI. Better AI writes better code. Better code improves robotics. Better robotics increase real world output. More output drives more demand for energy, chips, data centers, and infrastructure. And then the whole cycle starts speeding up again. That is the real idea here. Not just smarter chatbots, not just better search, a world where intelligence becomes so cheap, so scalable, and eventually so physical that it starts reshaping the economy from the inside out. And even if that is true, then this is not just a tech story. It is a story about productivity, labor, investing, healthcare, energy, money, and who ends up capturing the upside of a much bigger future. So in this video, I want to break down three things. First, what Elon actually means when he says the hard takeoff may already be happening. Second, why robots and energy matter just as much as software. And third, what regular people, builders, and investors should actually pay attention to right now if this shift is real. Because the biggest risk here may not be believing too much. It may be realizing too late that the rules were already changing. So let's get into it. What Elon means by hard takeoff. The first thing to understand is that Elon is not talking like someone who thinks AGI is some far off science fiction event. He's talking like someone who believes the curve has already bent upward. And most people still have not processed how fast it is getting steeper. And that is a very different claim. Most people still imagine AI progress as something like this. For a while, the tools get better slowly, then one day there is some dramatic breakthrough, and suddenly everything changes. But Elon's framing is more unsettling than that. His view is that the process may already be underway, not fully automated, not fully self-driving, but already compounding. One generation of models helps researchers build the next generation. The stronger generation then helps improve the tools, workflows, and code used to build the next one after that. Humans are still in the loop, but with every cycle, the systems are doing more of the intellectual heavy lifting. And that matters, because once intelligence starts helping to create more intelligence, progress stops feeling linear. It starts to feel like every time you look away, the frontier moved again. And one of the most important details in all of this is where Elon keeps pointing: coding. That is not random, because if machines get dramatically better at writing code, debugging systems, designing infrastructure, and improving the tools that improve the tools, then progress is almost every other field can start accelerating. In other words, the story is not really that AI gets better at conversation. The story is that intelligence starts becoming industrialized. It starts being applied to itself. And once that happens, old forecasting models start looking weak very quickly. Now, does that mean it will be one clean explosion upward forever? Probably not. A better way to think about it is a series of jumps. A breakthrough happens, growth feels explosive, then things level off a bit, then another breakthrough hits, then the whole system jumps again. That actually makes the current moment easier to understand because AI progress already feels uneven. Some months feel quiet, then suddenly a new model drops, new capabilities show up, and then the entire conversation changes overnight. So even if every timeline turns out to be too aggressive, the bigger point still stands. If the hard takeoff is not one magical moment, but a chain of accelerating breakthroughs, then the people waiting for a need before and after line may miss the whole thing while it is already happening. And that leads to the next question. What happens when this intelligence is no longer tracked? And this is where Elon's argument gets much bigger than software. Welcome to part 2 of this video. Because in this view, the real economic shock does not come only from AI writing better code or answering more questions. It comes when intelligence gets hands and feet, when it can move through the real world, when it can build, carry, inspect, repair, assemble, transport, clean, and perform useful physical work at scale. That is why he talks so much about humanoid robots. If those systems become capable enough, cheap enough, and reliable enough to deploy in large numbers, then the economy changes in a very literal way. You're no longer talking about only automating digital tasks. You're talking about increasing real-world production capacity across industry. And that is a completely different level of impact. Because if software can do more cognitive work and robots can eventually do more physical work, then the number of economically useful workers can rise dramatically without the human population rising at all. And that is the key point. The economy would not get bigger because people suddenly became superhuman. It would get bigger because each human would be surrounded by far more machine intelligence and far more machine labor than ever before. That is why Elon's view is not just about replacement, it is about output. Output per person could explode. And once you start thinking that way, some of his other comments may make a lot of sense. His argument is basically that if production rises fast enough, scarcity starts to behave differently. More goods, more services, more automation, more competition, lower real costs in many categories. That is the abundance thesis. Not that every problem disappears, not that the transition is painless, but that the end state could be a world where many things people want become dramatically cheaper. But that the end state could, and if that sounds too abstract, think about healthcare. This is one of the most human parts of the argument. Elon is not talking about GDP charts and futuristic factories. He's also talking about a future where AI improves diagnosis, treatment planning, robotic precision, preventative care, and access to high-quality medical support. And that matters, because even rich people run into the limits of today's healthcare system. Money alone does not guarantee that outcome. So, if AI can genuinely improve quality and consistency there, the effect on everyday life could be enormous. Even before we get to the more science fiction sounding predictions. Now, there is another piece of this that people often miss, And it may actually be one of the most important parts of the whole story. Because one of the scales because none of the scales without energy. More AI means more computation. More computation means more electricity. More robotics mean more industrial power demand. More data centers mean more strain on grids, transformers, generation, and infrastructure. So if this thesis is right, then energy abundance is not some side project and not some side topic. It sits near the center of the whole thing. And that is also why Elon thinks in such extreme terms. He tends to think in orders of magnitude, not small improvements, not a slightly better economy, not slightly better productivity, a civilization surrounded by far more intelligence, far more automation, and eventually far more physical output than exists today. About AI companies, but about factories, energy systems, moon industry, Mars, and the broader industrial capacity of civilization. Now, maybe some of those timelines are too optimistic. Maybe some are much too early. But the important part is the scale of the thinking. The people building this future are not aiming for small upgrades anymore. They are aiming at civilization scale change. And whether they get all the way there or not, that level of ambition alone can still reshape markets, labor, and the opportunity landscape in a very real way. So then the practical question becomes obvious. If every part of this is true, what should you actually do with that information? And here's part number 3, what I think regular people and investors should do. So here's my view. You do not need to believe every Elon timeline to take this seriously. You do not need to believe the exact year of AGI. You do not need to believe the exact robot rollout schedule. You do not need to believe the moon-based version, the Mars-based version, or the post-money version to understand that something important is happening. Because the direction is pretty clear. AI is getting better. It is getting cheaper. It is getting more integrated into work. Robotics is improving. Energy and output are becoming more central. And the people who benefit the most are probably not going to be the ones who sat back and waited for the headlines to feel comfortable. So if I were thinking about this practically, I would focus less on perfect prediction and more on positioning. For regular people, that means learning how to use these tools well. It means becoming more leveraged by AI, not more intimidated by it. It means figuring out where your skills become more valuable when paired with automation instead of pretending the future is not coming. For builders, the opportunity may be even bigger because the winners are often not just the people who consume the new technology, they are the people who build on top of it, organize around it, create workflows for it, build distribution around it, or become the interface through which other people use it. And for investors, the smartest place to look is bottlenecks. In a world that wants to grow much faster, the bottlenecks often become the most valuable assets. So I would watch semiconductors, power generation, grid infrastructure, transformers, data centers, industrial software, robotics supply chains, logistics, manufacturing capacities. The companies solving the constraint of an AI-heavy world could end up being just as important as the flashy AI application everyone talks about. I would also watch the proof. Not hype, proof. Do we start seeing real productivity gains? Do margins improve because of AI? Do factories, logistics, networks, software teams, and research workflows become measurably faster and more efficient? Does adoption move from cool demo to actual economic output? because that is when the story goes from exciting narrative to hard reality. At the same time, I would stay grounded. A 10x economy in 10 years is an extremely aggressive claim. The path could be slower, it could be uneven. Some sectors may boom while others lag. There will almost certainly be bubbles, hype cycles, policy fights, and messy transition periods. Some jobs will get repriced, some companies will look brilliant for a while and then fail to execute. So, this is not a story about blind optimism, but it's also not a story where fear is a strategy. The useful mindset is probably something in the middle, serious but open minded, grounded but optimistic enough to move. Because if intelligence really is becoming cheaper, more available, more embedded in systems, and eventually more physical, then waiting for certainty may be one of the worst positions you can take. I think that is the real takeaway from everything Elon is saying. The question is not whether the future unfolds exactly on his schedule. The question is whether the upper bound of economic growth is rising much faster than most people still realize. Because if it is, then this is not just another tech cycle. This is a shift in the product. This is a shift in the product. This is a shift in the productive capacity of civilization itself. And if that turns out to be even half true, then the biggest mistake may not be getting the timing slightly wrong. The biggest mistake may be preparing for a smaller world, while a much bigger one is already being just very close attention. Because if AI keeps improving itself, if robots start entering the workforce in meaningful numbers, if energy becomes the central bottleneck, and if abundance starts showing up in the real economy faster than people expect, then this conversation will not stay theoretical for long. It will show up in business, in markets, in labor, in politics, in everyday life. And the people who do best in that kind of world are usually not the ones who panic and not the ones who laugh it off. They are the ones who notice the curve early, adapt early, and build accordingly. So let me know in the comments, do you think a 10x economy in 10 years is actually possible? Or is Elon way too optimistic here? And if you want more videos like this about AI, business, investing, and where all this might be heading next, subscribe because there's a lot more to unpack. Please remember, this is not financial advice. And I'll see you in the next video.